Hello, this is our Rats with Team 45-45 League, analyzing the game between Epcot and Amersob. This game was played in Team Event 53 in the third round, under 2200 section. Actually, this game hasn't been completed. What I'm told, White lost internet connection and couldn't resume and forfeited the game, and I believe eventually the game will probably just be agreed to as a draw. I don't know, because the game is going to end up quite even. Let's have a look. Okay. And the Queen's Gambit Accepted has been holding up just fine in the games that we've seen in this event. I have suggested an alternative move in one of my videos to play e4 to throw black out of his main lines because they all seem to be holding up, and black's even winning games with this opening. So to accept the Queen's Gambit, White's going to have to be a little better prepared because it seems like that black is. Okay, and the game really stays very, very even. There's not much going here at all. We'll discuss some of the ideas and concepts as we go, but anytime black can just pretty much draw at will with an opening, it's definitely worth a look. And since d4 is commonly played in Team 45-45 League, for now I'm going to say black should continue to play it, and until you guys start watching my videos and see what I'm suggesting to counter it, it's going to keep getting draws and wins for black. So it's on you guys to learn. I've made these resources available for you. Take my word or don't take my word, but right now this opening is holding up, and I'll remind everyone that Bobby Fischer in his return match for the World's Championship with Spassky in 1992, his strategy was win with white, draw with black, and he used the Queen's Gambit Accepted over and over again and was achieving his draws. So White's going to have to do better. Okay. So how does White do better out of an opening like this? Okay, what's basically going to happen is, in a lot of cases, the D and the C files clear up. At some point, White could be taking on C5. Ideally, he'd like to do it after black moves his bishop, if it's going to happen at all. Okay, why, you ask? Okay, well, the reason is simple. Then that bishop would take two moves to capture a pawn it might have captured in one move. And that's the whole idea. One of the reasons why White will not exchange on c5 until an appropriate time. Black, in the meantime, usually goes for some kind of a pawn roller on the queen side and fianchettos the dark squared bishop, and then continues his development. In some cases, this pawn will even go into c4, and we'll never have an exchange, and black will have an outside pawn majority. Okay. So now black decides to go ahead and take. Now white needn't worry about that, and because d4 was under some pressure, black had more control over it than white. White does employs a little pin here to make sure that he doesn't lose his pawn. Okay, and I'm not sure how much of this is book. It probably still is, but in theory and concept, it's probably dead even. Let's look at the alternatives. White accepts an isolated queen pawn, and that's not a bad thing in itself. It could be if black's able to achieve a lasting blockade on d5, and I'll talk about some ideas how to do that. But the alternative is like I say, you just end up leaving two open files that both sides can and will occupy. Maybe knight takes has some merit because now there's a threat of a discovery. Now, what can black do? Well, he has some resources. He can just get his queen out of there. Queen to b6 comes to mind. Okay, that safeguards the knight, and well, the queen will. Ooh, you can't do that. Okay, you see a trick? Okay, I was just going to say that white's threatening to mess up the black pawn structure, and so queen b6 would protect it, but there's a tactical flaw if black goes into that. And here I'll show you. Knight takes. Whoops. Well, white's not. I'm sorry. Here. White's not on the move. Okay, now knight takes, and black cannot take with the queen, and it's a one mover. You should see it without any difficulty. I don't think I need to pause the video for this. bishop b5, and black's very embarrassed. So let's look back. Knight takes d4. I'm sure there's some theory to this. What does black do? If he has two choices: take the knight or get the queen off the dangerous file, right? Because, for instance, if he plays a move like bishop d7, white could take, and now black has one weakness, something for white to focus on. One weakness, and you need two to win the game, but winning one will win a valuable pawn, and white should be doing fine, have great winning chances. Okay, so it seems that what black has to do is move his queen, and I just explained that queen b6 doesn't really work. So what does black do here? He may have to just stop and take this knight, and that allows white this resource to take on d4 with a tempo. Now that rook could be a little exposed on d4, but that's all right. We'll bring him back home. We'll bring him back home if he's attacked. But black needs to do something with his queen now. And what are his alternatives? Well, he can play knight d5, but white may very well take the knight with his bishop, and in return for the bishop pair, white has a target. He has an isolated queen pawn to pressure himself. So that could be a tough choice for black to make. Knight d5, bishop takes, pawn takes, as I was saying. Now white goes about his way with knight c3, and black may have to play something like bishop e6, and after even queen d1, the reason you want to go there is because it gives an option of a check. Well, actually, you can just give a check right away. What's wrong with the check? Okay. If bishop d7, white trades. I'm sorry, white just takes on d5, and he's up a pawn. So black can't play for the isolated pawn. He must or accept an isolated pawn. He's probably going to lose it. Well, I could be missing something. He might have to play a move like queen b6, and white could play bishop b5 check here. I mean, he doesn't have to. He could develop a piece with knight c3. But the point is, if you make this exchange, there's some pressure right now on d7. Black is unable to castle here, so white could try a tricky queen g4. Then black can't castle to hold g7 because the knight falls. But black may have some resources here. Rook c8 threatens a back rank trick, just taking the bishop. It's not quite a mate, but I don't know. You know, it seems like that taking with the rook was a viable alternative for black. So or for white, he could have taken on d4 with his knight. That just seems fine. Okay, but the players can answer that. I won't get lost up in it. Okay, so now black is trying to achieve the blockade of the isolated pawn, maneuvering a knight to d5, and that knight makes a great blockader. Something we learned from Nimzovich. If you haven't read my system, find it at your local library and dig in. You'll learn a lot. Okay, so now I don't quite understand a3. It just drives the knight to where it wants to go. White might be better off just by developing a piece, but maybe he wants a2 for his bishop and then be able to swing some kind of a pressure where the queen and bishop set up on the long diagonal. I don't know. But that just drives black where he wants to go, and now develops a piece. Now here, this is an interesting choice. Black gives up the idea of having an isolated pawn to work with, but instead he splits the white pawns on the queen side. Now white has 3 pawn islands, black has 2. So possibly, ever so slightly, this game's in black's favor. And here, white could just consider taking on e7, just for the fact that his bishop will be a better piece when it's all said and done. But he stops and keeps the bishop on the board, and black obliges and says, I want to trade my good bishop for your bad one. So and I'm basing this on the structure, if you note, of White's 6 pawns, 5 of them are on White, and I'm sorry, 5 of them are on Black, and the reverse can be said for Black. Of his 6 pawns, 5 of them are on White. So making this trade helps White out, I believe, but it's not a big advantage, but it's something. So White probably has a slight plus here. He's better developed, and his bishop is better, and the Black bishop is entombed, but the Black bishop is coming out. Now maybe b6 would have been more prudent. Keep the pawn on a dark square, not make it a future target for that bishop. But it's hard to say. And then White just goes right in, and he might have held that move back and just play for it later. Maybe try to play for the fact that these pawns are on White. But it's hard to say exactly what White's plan is. Let's just consider it for a moment. For White to take advantage of a minor piece ending, he needs knight versus bishop, which may actually be a draw, but it might be a win. You have to look it up. There's something to be said about both sides, or a bishop versus knight, or a bishop versus bishop ending. Anything but a knight versus knight ending favors White. So what White has to do is get the queens and the rooks off. Well, it's kind of hard. It's kind of hard to get the queens and the rooks off both when you have a lot of open files. I mean, unless you have open files, and there really aren't any open files. So, where does White create one? It's hard to say. The only thing I can think of is to somehow try to work out a method to advance his H pawn up the board to H6 if he can get that far, but he can't even move it 2 squares right now. It gets taken. So it's difficult to see how White improves his position here. He can try and set up a mating battery, bishop c2 and queen d3, but Black can defend against that, or slide rook over to e1 and up to e4, and then try to figure out how to get it to h4. If not, get it to g4, and maybe somehow some file will open up there, and a set of rooks or queens can be exchanged, and White can play for an ending. Okay, let's just move on. There's really not much more to this game. There's just a few wholesale exchanges, and like I say, and nothing's really being accomplished here. And White finds a nice square first knight. That's a great square to have the knight, with it being on a dark square. And as I was saying, knight versus bishop ending can be favorable for White, simply because the White pawns are on the opposite color of the Black bishop, and most of the Black pawns are on the same color as his bishop, so his bishop is kind of neutralized. But it's on a nice long diagonal, and that gives Black some adequate compensation. But then White just shuts off the diagonal a little bit, but in the process weakens his pawns ever so slightly. And just like I say, just a little bit of random maneuvering. And now we've got a file open, and we have seen one set of rooks come off, but not the other. So now Black's kind of stuck, has to put his rook back. And I think the game goes 1 or 2 more moves. And h3, I don't quite understand that. It just creates it sets up a position where Black has got more pawns on the... I mean, White has more pawns on the color of the Black bishop. It's a potential target. So now h6, this is where the game ended. I don't, because White disconnected, I don't quite understand h6. I was just thinking the logical move to play here is h5. And unless White's fearing something, the point is that you want to play h4 next, okay? If you get h4 in, then that pawn is really pressuring the White pawns. They're immobile. They can't really do anything. And Black tries to play on the dark squares. And how else can he proceed? Well, it's going to be kind of hard to get the rook in. White's controlling the open file. And at some point, White might even play rook a7, which would keep an eye on f7. And, you know, how's Black going to continue? Maybe get the pawn to g6, the king up, swing the rook over somehow and try and use it on the h-file. I don't know. It's hard to say. But the game is basically even, but structurally white should be okay. He shouldn't lose this if it was a minor piece ending, but he might, simply because the bishop has some targets now that it wouldn't, especially in an ending when this is on h4. White's always going to have to be leery of a bishop getting back to f1 and winning a bunch of pawns. So if the game continues, black could win. But one thing I'll note before I close is that black is not spending any time on this game, and yet he's got probably at least an even game. Okay, I'm sorry the game didn't finish, and I don't know when it will, if it ever will, but I thank you for your time and looking at this, and I'll look forward to making another video for you soon. Take care.